right after this. This should take about 52 minutes. About.
Should I put my timer
Roughly.
on?
Yep, do it. So we should have a little bit of time left. If not, I'll stay a little bit later, and if you have other questions. I took a bunch of questions from people on the listserv, and I'll answer those at the end, and a bunch of the other ones are answered in the production. Okay?
Can you turn the lights on?
Are there more lights? Off? On or off?
A state of adventure is fundamental to the human experience. I heard this in a podcast I was listening to last week, driving up to Oregon, and I felt very affirmed in my choice to go on this motorcycle trip. Huberman also says, no matter how far you drive, you're always the same distance from the ditch. I can't really, that's tough. Thanks though.
She should sit on a chair.
Which is something I also thought about. I can't help but wonder if I'm using adventure as a geographical cure, but I kind of hope not. I've been thinking about this trip for a long time, but I was concerned about going back to the working world again and was looking for employment. I applied at a few places around the Bay, but didn't connect with anything. And then I got word that an old military friend and lover, Ronnie, took his own life. It was shocking and was the event that flipped the decision switch for me. I think every person at some time in their lives, tell me if I'm wrong, thinks for at least just a moment, what's it all worth anyway? The job can wait. Riding is a really good way to process big feelings. The sound of the wind is loud. It hits your body all over. The helmet barely shields it, which is good because thoughts don't get too loud. It's much easier to think about difficult things over the sound of the road. Also, there's a ton of logistics that are distracting from self-pity. At the end of the day, the inside of my head always feels a little tidier. There's three stories: the technical story, the emotional story, and the geographical story. But first, I'm going to tell you the backstory. I didn't start riding a motorcycle till I was 30. I learned while I was at my first duty station in Oak Harbor, Washington. My chief loaned me his Ninja 250 and gave me a lesson. He said, when you lean, turn. That was the lesson. I did exactly what I was told, and I fell over a lot. I brought it back with scratches on both fairings, and both of the port starboard turn signals busted off. Not to be discouraged, I bought a Honda Shadow, and before I took a motorcycle class, I rode it all over town. My turns were very wide. In fact, I frequently almost sideswiped cars parked at lights in the opposite lane. I ran out of fuel on my way to my motorcycle class, partly because I didn't know I had a reserve switch on the bike yet. I didn't get better quickly after taking the class. I was a shit show for a long time, but I kept riding and fortunately didn't have any consequence that changed my mind about it. Moral is, it's okay to really suck at something for a while as long as you keep doing it. Riding, not sucking. The normal pattern is eventually you'll get good. By the time I began this trip, I had at least 100,000 miles on various motorcycles. I'm still not a great rider compared to other ADV riders, just good enough not to have a lot of wrecks. A motorcycle is a good choice for this kind of travel because on my KLR 650, I get about 53 miles a gallon, which some cars get, but not ones that go off-road as far as I know. This motorcycle has a large following and robust forums that you can learn to fix almost anything that goes wrong. They've been making the same motorcycle for 3 decades, and I've been riding one for 2. Pretty much everything that can go wrong has gone wrong on these bikes for me. So I have some good clues how to diagnose and repair them. It's a Kawasaki. They are simple machines, there's parts everywhere, and most mechanics know how to work on them. There's a catch. If you ride this bike past about 5 grand or 70, 75 miles an hour, it starts burning oil. At least mine does. I named her the Seahorse. She was a gift from my old roommate and friend, Greg. We served together in the Middle East, bougie United Arab Emirates, where we provided force protection to 2 ports, Fujairah and Jebel Ali, but mostly stayed in Dubai. He retired recently. He retired recently and was moving to South Africa with his war bride. And out of the 6 bikes he had here in his garage in the Bay Area, only 5 were going, and the KLR didn't make the cut. It had been sitting for 10 years in storage. It wasn't running, it didn't have a key, and the tires were flat. I love the idea of bringing it back to life and doing a big adventure on it. I prefer riding solo because my judgment is excellent. You weren't supposed to laugh there.
That's a good line.
It's far better than most people's, and I'm generally more disciplined about safety and following rules I set for myself. I make better judgment calls in the moment now that I know how to ride. And I don't want to manage someone else's emotions or expectations on a trip where I have to wrestle with my own. The other and best reason to ride solo is because of the people that you get to meet. Not to say you won't meet people riding as a couple, but the vibe changes. And if you're traveling with a group, even more different. There are all good and smart ways to travel, no one being better than the other. But for me, solo travel is what I prefer. Group travel can be super fun. There's a big yellow Mog, this is a Mog, that I ran into on the Dalton Highway. I ran into them 2 times more. Once on the top of the World Road at the border, and then again at Dawson City. It's kind of like a land cruise ship. They are traveling for 7 months together, from Prudhoe Bay to Patagonia. They all seem super friendly and happy to know each other. There they are. Waved at each other many times. Here are a few of my hard and fast rules for riding. Don't expect people to do what they're supposed to do. Don't ride in blind spots. Never get into a pissing contest with a car. Don't drink and ride. Don't ride at night. Don't ride in a hurry. Don't ride behind trucks. If something doesn't feel right, pay attention to that. Try to be where you're going to be by mid-afternoon. Ride until you're tired, not after. Swimming has very close to the same centering and healing power for me as riding. The effects are, however, longer lasting. I love the excitement of getting ready for a swim, the almost ritual-like preparation, the connection my whole body feels with the air, the sand, the sun, and the water. If I have something sad or challenging I'm feeling, I pack that up with my goggles and my swim cap and walk that mess straight into the water. The worse the problem, the colder the water should be. It's an instant cure. Maybe not permanent, but it's a really good break from the circus going on in my head. I frequently swim alone, which is not the best idea for everyone, but if I didn't, I get to swim a lot less. There's a bunch of different rules I follow for that, but there's for sure a little bit of overlap. Swimming rules. If something doesn't feel right, pay attention to that. Always have your rewarming plan in place before getting into the water. Make sure the phone has a full charge if I need to call for help. If I'm in an area with no cell service, make sure that the Garmin InReach has full power so I can call for help if I need it. This is a satellite communication device and GPS. I purchase the emergency protection and texting service each time I go on a big solo trip or a road trip abroad, whether I'm motorcycling, paragliding, sailing, or swimming cold water. This device is the one piece of equipment I always carry. I have it with me here if you'd like to see it later. My original plan was to connect different swimming groups and water keepers who protect our waters onshore and inland and talk to them about what they do.
I'm Sejal Choksi-Chu, and I'm the Executive Director of San Francisco Baykeeper. We're an environmental nonprofit. We've been around for 34 years, and we sue polluters. We are raising awareness about Baykeeper's work because the bay wouldn't be swimmable without the work that we do. We've stopped thousands of polluters over the years. We have stopped mercury pollution, oil pollution, PCBs pollution, coal pollution. We've done a lot of work to reduce pollution in the bay, and that's what makes it safe for swimming. There are 7 million people around the bay, and so many people who love to swim in the bay and recreate around it, and yet they don't know who Baykeeper is. If we have the support of 7 million people, we can make an even bigger impact. We can make sure that we're holding those polluters accountable. We can make sure that we are getting the government agencies to actually regulate, make stronger laws to protect all of us who use the bay. And you can feel really good about getting in that water.
But the fast pace of my trip didn't allow for people to plan and meet up for interviews. The first couple stops were non-starters. They took a lot of energy out of my already robust pace. And I still wasn't able to connect with the people I'd hoped to talk to, so I quickly pivoted. I like having an organizing principle, and since I planned to swim everywhere anyway, it was easy. This is the Applegate Lake in the Applegate Valley. It's one of my favorite places ever. Christina lives just up the road, and we decided to come out for a swim and to take Guapo too. It's such a magical place to swim, and not very far from the house either. Pinballing my way up to Canada at friends' places gave me the chance to test out my motorcycle swimming thing with some ability to work the kinks out along the way because I wasn't really ready to leave. I wasn't entirely sure how I'd be rewarming as I rode. I had some good ideas, but they were totally untested. And I hadn't seen any of my old friends in a long time. On the way up to the border, I stopped in Rouge, Bend, Portland, and Beaverton, Oregon, Issaquah, Port Townsend, and Oak Harbor, Washington. I love this swim. It's probably one of my favorite ever. It's right in front of the Marine Science Center in Port Townsend, and there's a fantastic little coffee shop that you can go and get a bathroom code for changing and have a coffee before and after you have a swim. I've only seen a couple other people over here ever, and they're usually in wetsuits. I do attract quite a bit of attention swimming underneath the pier like this. When I lived here, I swam all year round, and the coldest I remember the water getting was around 43 degrees.
When I was in the Navy, I used to come over and dive with a friend. There was a pier that was covered in these sea anemones, and it made it look like a cathedral underwater. I was hoping to see that today, but there is just the one. I didn't have any planned places to stay once I crossed into the Canadian border, aside from a friend in Anchorage. I found where to camp through various methods. I used HipCamp, iOverlander, the Milepost, Airbnb, and word of mouth along the road. The Milepost is a 2-pound tome that's put out once a year that has an outrageous amount of information for almost every mile along most of British Columbia and Alaska's major routes. You can get it digitally also.
There are 6 time zones in Canada. Newfoundland has its very own time zone, which is only a half an hour ahead rather than the standard 1 hour. It's called Newfoundland time. Alaska has 2. Alaskan time zone and Hawaiian time zone. That's right. It's so far west that part of Alaska is directly above Hawaii, and all of it is far west of California. You probably hear me making a big effort to emphasize the last syllable in Newfoundland. They are very conscious that it sounds like Newfoundland and make a point to tell people from away how to pronounce their province. Canada isn't at all what I thought it might be. One of the reasons I did this trip the way I did is because I felt like I knew nothing about our neighbor to the north, and I was right. Even though I did some research and asked a bunch of questions, it surprised me in a bunch of ways. Most significantly, in its diversity, both in landscape, culture, and ethnicity. It's wildly diverse. There were so many accents, especially in Toronto. You could get any kind of food you wanted there, and it was cheap. Except Mexican food. No one can do good Mexican food outside of Mexico and the U.S. Southwest. I'll fight you on that. Canada has 10 provinces and 3 territories. The territories are enormous tracts of land, mostly wilderness, and extremely sparsely populated. I left the U.S. at Sumas and found my first camp spot at Big Bar Lake. Here's a video of my first hip camp find.
It's mid-60s, but it feels really cold. It's beautiful though.
Today I'm going to show you my preferred camping setup. I have another one, but when the weather isn't this perfect is when I'm going to use that setup. This is pretty much ideal situation. This is the hammock that I have set up, and I have it with the bug net. The only thing I don't have on here tonight is the underquilt, and I'll be using that the next time I set it up. I feel like the nights are just a little too cold to not have it. It's 45 degrees, about 45 degrees last night. This is probably exactly what it looks like. If I don't know that it's gonna rain, you know, I set it up so I can get it in the middle of the night and pull it over. The bug net is kind of a no-duh. I have it set up so I can easily pull it in the night. There's zippers on the inside and the outside. And then my sleeping setup inside, I've got a 15-degree bag, and I've got this nice little thermarest, which is about perfect. I am doing this, I can believe this, I'm doing this, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. Look at the sun is, it's already way up. Right, like it's 9 or 10 or something. And this is my water. I didn't bring any water today, but I knew that I was stopping at a lake. So this is a Katadyn water maker. I just scoop some up and pour it out the nozzle, and I drink water. It's very handy, and I have as much as I want. I can make water all day long. I'm here at my Airbnb this morning, and I'm kind of looking at where I've been and trying to figure out exactly where I'm going today, and trying to make it like a 2-day plan. I stopped here instead of camping because I had to go to a couple different stores and buy some stuff, basic stuff, and I don't like parking outside of large grocery stores with all my bags. So I came in to Canada through Sumas right here, and then I cut over to and then went to Kamloops. I had to pick up some oil. My bike's burning a little bit of oil right now, and then I cut over, and then I came up here, and my first stop was Big Bar Lake. Come in right before the 70 Mile House. That's that little lake right there. And then a road from here up to Prince George, where I'm at right now. And I'm trying to figure out how many miles I want to put in today. I think I'm going to take this route rather than this route. All right, just check the weather. If I go this way, which I'm very interested in doing, so maybe on the way back, I'm going to hit a lot of rain. And it's really cold, so cold plus rain does not sound appealing to me. So instead, what I'm going to do today, I'm going to go to Dawson Creek. So I went up the Alcan and then came down the Cassiar Highway. Oh, the Cassiar is spectacular. Anyway. Through this whole western region, I was scared to death of bears, mostly because I didn't have any practical experience with a bear, except for seeing a couple on hiking trails in Washington State and my research on the YouTubes. It was enough to give me an idea what to do, but I still didn't feel prepared. Aside from Prudhoe Bay and Anchorage, Alaska, Newfoundland, and Lake Memphremagog, I didn't have any actual destination plans. I thought Jasper and Banff because I'd been hearing about them for a long time, but I didn't have a clear picture if that would happen. After Big Bar Lake, I made my way up through British Columbia towards the Yukon Territory. Right before my first coldest swim, I got a flat. What happened next was one of the reasons why this kind of travel is so heartwarming and soul satisfying. Watch what Tiziano, fellow adventure writer, and kind heart does. So, I got a flat. I got a flat! Ooh, yeah. I gotta think that's a badass GS.
You know how to pick it up?
I've never done this before. caused it. We're gonna have to figure out what fucking caused that.
Let's start praying. To put the thing inside the. Do it again. Open up the tire right now, like that where my fingers are. Okay, not too much because now it's gonna push it in.
Oh, you got it. You got it. You're
I
there.
don't, yeah.
You're just there. You're right there. Ah!
Yeah. I don't kid.
Where you headed?
I'm trying to go to the lake apparently today.
What's
Headed to Alaska.
Yeah. Brutal force.
Yeah, let's start.
Yeah. All right.
That's it.
Holy shit.
Wow. I didn't time it, but
That was actually pretty fast.
an hour.
As you can see, Tiziano is also extremely handsome, and after reporting his good deed on my Facebook page, he had several very forward offers from my single and not even single friends. After his reporting my rescue on the Adventure Rider Forum, I later discovered I'd also become locally famous with other riders in the area. This sort of help isn't an isolated experience. I had multiple disaster rescues. I made it to Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, where I was terrified to go any further on my motorcycle because it had developed a chugging motion that scared me into thinking my chain would break apart. I wasn't wrong. It was like riding a hobby horse. The chain had become so worn that it was longer in certain parts, which caused the whole bike to buck. I called every bike shop in town, and absolutely no one would look at my bike for at least a week, except for Clint at Ox Motorcycles. He was a knight in shining armor repair outside regular hours and at a last-minute notice. These kind of motorcycle shops are owned by people who love not only to ride, but to help fellow adventurers and also work on bikes, which is its own thing. There are surprisingly a lot of people who love to wrench on a bike, but not even ride at all. And then again in St. Anthony, Newfoundland, where Fred and Regine, who barely speaks English, he's a very French Canadian, came to my rescue when my bike caught on fire. I had spent the night in a torrential downpour where the rain was coming down so hard that it was splashing back up at the bottom of my hammock, soaking everything under my rainfly. In the morning, I packed all of my soggy belongings and rode for hours north, where I stopped at a Tim Hortons to get a cup of coffee and warm up. An hour later, as I was leaving the parking lot, a plume of smoke came out of the front of the bike and shut completely off. A fellow I met at another campsite in Blanc-Sablon, Quebec, a week earlier, was standing in the same parking lot as me with a serious-looking man on a Harley. They asked me how I was, and I told them about my fireside moment, which might have ended my trip. Fred tells me Regine here is a mechanic, and he'd like to have a look at the bike. He went to work faster than anyone I'd ever seen pull apart a motorcycle. In under half an hour, he got the crash bars off the bike, peeled back the burned wires, cleaned the melted plastic off, and started taping it all back together. We all celebrated equally, as though it were our cumulative bike. After my first roadside rescue with Tiziano, I stopped to swim and stay at Muncho Lake. I think that's how I say it. Also, where I ran into Casey again, the gal who stopped to help while we were fixing a flat.
It's 44 degrees. Oh yeah. Oh, that was cold. Really cold.
There is only one way into and out of Alaska along the motor route, and that's through Tok. There are two land borders, which I crossed through both, but they funnel through Tok, which in the 1940s was an Alaskan Road Commission camp used for construction and maintenance along the Alaskan Highway. There are several versions of where the name Tok, Alaska came from. Uncontested, its pronunciation is Tok, not Tok. You will be firmly corrected when you make the expected mispronunciation. The version told to me by purple-haired Vanessa at Thompson's Eagle Claw Motorcycle Park was that the road construction effort was called Tokyo Camp until Pearl Harbor started. Then they shortened it to Tok. A popular second story is that Tok means peaceful crossing in the native Athabascan language. I love riding in the wilderness. The air is always sweet. Sometimes it's the ultra-dense spruce and pine. Sometimes the moist earth after a rain. Sometimes it's the little flowering plants along the side of the road that have gotten there by their seeds traveling on the wheels of every vehicle and letting go like a speedboat whipping a kid off a towed floaty. I mostly camped. The provincial parks are very well kept. Staff is friendly and efficient, and the facilities are almost always pin neat. Since my organizing principle was swimming, I was worried about finding good camp spots with a lake nearby, but those fears were put to rest once I started traveling along the Alcan. I didn't have hot water bottles, but I did have a very warm hammock set up. I would put it together before I went for a swim, so if I came back very cold, I can crawl into a 15-degree sleeping bag that was also protected from the wind by not just a hammock, but an underquilt and an inflatable sleeping pad. Frequently, I would just bundle up and go for a walk. This isn't as relaxing as laying in a poofy hammock with tea, but it actually warms you up much faster. Much of the water that I swam in wasn't terribly cold. The coldest places were Mudgeo Lake, Fox Lake, Dease Lake on the Cassiar Highway, Newfoundland, Maine, New Hampshire, and Lake Superior. Everywhere else was close to 60 degrees and above. I didn't get to swim in Alaska as much as I wanted. I swam in Whitehorse, which is in the Yukon Territory. It was told to me by residents that it's not a great place to swim. I completely disagree and feel like I have a ton more exploring in the area to do, and I can't wait to go back. Also, there are a few good paragliding sites, so it's kind of a double whammy for a return trip. I wanted to go to Prudhoe Bay because it's a super pretty Arctic wilderness I have zero experience with. 1,000 miles of mostly dirt and gravel, a motorcycle's dream destination, and I also wanted to swim in the Arctic. The route is super dangerous for several reasons. Firstly, because the traffic is mostly commercial big rigs that drive super fast and don't like motorcycles in their way. The second is because the road is mostly made of chip seal, which turns to a thick, slick, slippery slime when it gets wet. And there are always wet portions. Every internet site has tales of terror along the road. There are many stories of people being airlifted out, wrecked bikes, broken bones, and much worse. One of the guys I stayed with in Fairbanks, who is an excellent Chilean rider, broke his leg there last year and is back for a second try this year.
The other leg?
See if we can get the other one. This is Coldfoot Camp. These are all working helicopters. None of them are for tourists. And this is the Dolphin Highway. I just pull over when these trucks come by. You can see them coming from a long way away. So you can't hardly even see the road too, and then dragging up that dust. I made 2 attempts and called it quits after the second. The first time I turned around before the actual start of the Dolphin Highway because my bike had a fuel leak that was soaking my pants, which I was attempting to ignore, except for a ferocious thunderstorm came by that ended up wiping out part of the paved road at the end of the Dolphin Highway, right before Dead Horse, which is at the end of the Dolphin Highway. And the second time I made it halfway, but was then told by nearly every person I passed that there were 80 miles of mud on the way from Coldfoot, where I was stopped, to Dead Horse, and everyone coming back looked wrecked. My knee was in a bad, gimpy way, as it were, so I passed on the attempt. It was exorbitantly expensive for an austere accommodation. I was already over my budget with the first failed attempt. Also, I had to get moving. My time here was up. I'll have to come back for another try. I wiggled my way around Alaska, visited my buddy in Anchorage, a school friend in Homer, and crossed back into the Yukon through Tok and up across the top of the world road. I stopped in Dawson City, which is also worth a second stay. Then down through BC on the Cassiar Highway, which had enough beautiful camping and cold clear lakes to last an entire summer. Here's my favorite 2 lakes on that road.
It's really nice. Probably one of the most unbelievable places I've ever swam. I just lucked out.
Species Lake, also on the Cassiar. I stopped in Spectacular Stewart, which even the customs officer told me about, and came down through BC through Jasper and Banff. The threat of bears was everywhere, and I was continually stressed about the possibility of meeting one face to face, but never had the experience except for many roadside sightings. A motorcyclist back on the Cassiar hit one that was chasing another bear across the road. Their group was halted until they could find their buddy a ride home. I have a kooky thing for names. I wanted to visit Thunder Bay because it sounded very cool. And Moose Jaw. And Lake Manicouagan because it is cool. AKA the Eye of Quebec. It's a lake that looks like a giant eye from space and on your Google map. It was created by a meteor 214 million years ago. It's now a 45-mile diameter lake that has an island in the middle that is bigger than the actual lake. I wish I wasn't horrifyingly sick from my Manicouagan visit, but I still got in the water. It felt alive and healing on my sick skin. I am at Lake Manicouagan. I think that's how you say it. I saw this one day on the Facebooks or the TikToks or the something, and I just thought it was the coolest damn thing. It's the island in the middle is bigger than the lake itself. All of the water around here is this kind of tea color. I don't know if this is good for a cold, but it feels really fucking good. I wanted to visit Montreal and Quebec City. I didn't know a damn thing about either and hadn't done a bit of research. So it was shocking to me when I arrived that everyone was speaking French and the food was outrageously good. They are both exquisitely beautiful old European cities that I can't wait to go back and visit with a lot more money. Labrador and Newfoundland are grouped in the same province. I don't really know why, but they are not anything alike. Labrador is wilderness, like all of it. At night, you'll hear wolves and I think the mosquitoes are about the same size. The bugs were unbelievable. Worst of the trip. Newfoundland. I want to swim with an iceberg. I really do. I devoted 2 whole days to that cause. Conch was where I could do that, but the time wasn't right. There's no good place to warm up. Sun was supposed to come out at 4, but never made an appearance. And I was just warm enough with my motorcycle jacket on. I was gonna go anyway, but I left my swimsuit back at camp to dry from the swim I did earlier. Camp is 2 hours away on an exceptionally cold, windy day. And it's later in the evening now, which means the moose will be wandering the roads soon. They come out in the evening, so I avoid riding at those times. The water temp was 50 when measured at the far shore, but dropped significantly when I brought the thermometer close to the small bit of ice I just busted a piece off. I suspect it will be very, very cold next to the bigger bergs. I know I'll shiver for about an hour in a warm car after a 10-minute cold swim. And I'm patently alone right now. The iceberg I identified to swim next to wasn't as big as the others. It's a terrible idea to swim next to an iceberg, by the way, because at this point they're calving huge chunks. They'll crack like thunder off one side of them and splash in the water, causing huge waves and spray. It doesn't happen once in a blue moon. It's happening as I watch and take pictures. I'll wait 5 or 10 minutes and a new piece cracks and rolls. I met a new friend at the coffee shop who says she'll support my iceberg swimming effort when I return next year. It's not off the table. Just a little delayed. Newfoundland is a return trip. I will swim with an iceberg. Even though it's a super bad idea because they calve and flip over. I got skunked because of the weather. Newfies are extremely friendly and pleasant people. That's where I ran into my 2 French-Canadian friends who saved my ass in front of the Tim Hortons in St. Anthony. Also, where I met Renee, who is very excited to sit on my motorcycle. She showed me around St. John's on the other side of the island. St. John's, not St. John, very different. On the other side of the island, where I had to catch a ferry across to Nova Scotia the next day. She's been sending me pictures of all the snow she's been shoveling this week. I rode the Cabot Trail in Nova Scotia, swam in PEI, stopped in St. John, New Brunswick, swam in Acadia National Park with Beth and my old East Coast swim group near Portsmouth at Genesee Beach. I am in New Hampshire at Genesee Beach. This is my old swim group from when I was living in Maine. Look who just showed up. Bethelicious. Things are good, of course. Yay.
water than I've been in a while. Oh, there she is, Beth Delicious.
So good to see you.
So good to be here.
Hi. See the flag? We check in?
Flag and check in. I'm turning around at the flag. Those guys are going 2 miles from today. I'm doing 1 mile swim today. I don't remember where the heck I'm supposed to get out. Oh boy.
I wasn't sure how I was going to return west. I really just meandered that way, and as long as I was able to keep learning and meeting nice people, I would continue my trajectory. I wanted to go back up to Thunder Bay, but the weather had turned poorly, so I headed towards Montana, where I wanted to see Glacier National Park anyhow. Before that, I committed to swimming in Lake Memphremagog, the Great Lakes, and Lake Champlain, allegedly the sixth Great Lake. These are fighting words, depending on where you're from. The Great Lakes are based strictly on their proximity to each other, their size as interconnected navigable waters, and most importantly, government funding for the lakes and surrounding states. Lake Champlain is far smaller, but still has navigable water access to the other lakes. I swam in all of them. Lake Champlain endeared me to Vermont and is a committed destination for a future ride and swim.
This is Lake Michigan, same place where in boot camp I was trying to be an EOD tech, and they would throw us in the water and march in our special programs. And it was, I would say, breathtakingly cold, but I wasn't able to take a breath. The water was so cold, it was like a vice around my chest. And then we had to swim out to a little buoy and back. And then they would hose us down with cold water. And I'm glad that I've made peace with this lake, because this is one of my favorite swims of the entire trip.
Americans are a little geographically handicapped, myself included. I, for example, didn't know that Michigan was, in fact, two separate and distinct peninsulas. I never heard of Petoskey stones, which are fossilized coral, or Yooper rocks. They glow in the dark as long as you have a black light, or that a Yooper was actually a geographical identity for a person. That's the Upper Peninsula, Yooper. As I was crossing the upper Midwest, right around Duluth, Minnesota, I started noticing the faint smell of metal burning, which I know to be a bad smell coming from a motorcycle. Also, the bike was becoming very difficult to start. This, at a minimum, is a valve job. More than just a roadside repair and something I was hoping would wait until I at least got back home, this changed a significant amount of the pinballing I was going to do. I knew I couldn't put on more miles than I absolutely had to from here on out.
Montana was one of my favorite places where the camping was mostly free and the landscape was spectacular. Also, Glacier National Park deserves at least a week visit, not the single day road ride I gave it. By the time I returned to Washington, I'd stopped at Chief Dave's in Oak Harbor, visited Port Townsend again, but I felt the bike needed a look through, so I stopped at Steve's place and pulled the head apart. While I was doing this, I dropped a nut into the crankcase. You know what that means. Which, if I had done this in my own garage, it would have still been a panic issue, but it was devastating here because this can turn into a multi-day or multi-week repair. And I'm pretty sure him and his girlfriend don't like me that much. Most of a sweaty day later, with the use of a borescope, I was able to retrieve the nut and swap the shims, which had been given the wrong size anyway by the dealer. And then when putting the bike back together, forgot to install the cam chain tensioner, which is a critical piece of engine equipment. This was the end of the trip.
Well, I'm on my way back home. The seahorse in the back. Me in the front. Hopefully I can get it going. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do yet. I'm formulating a plan. See what happens.
I didn't meet a huge community of cold water swimmers. That's not to say there weren't any. I swam with Christina in the Applegate, Angie in Portland, and my old pals on the East Coast because I knew just who to call and find out when the swim was. I couldn't convince anyone beyond them that cold water was the best thing they could do for their day. It's an acquired taste, a quirky, sensual treat for the adventurer, a healing balm for the seeker, a life experience for anyone bold enough to explore just beyond the water's edge.